Good morning, English 3 students. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the concept of the American dream, which wasn't labeled as such until the 1930s, but certainly existed as a concept at the time of The Great Gatsby, is arguably the central theme of The Great Gatsby. We're going to be talking about the American dream a lot more next week as we finish The Great Gatsby and see what all is being suggested about the American dream. But what I want to do today is I want to talk about some different key symbols that we've seen so far in The Great Gatsby and explore with those symbols what those symbols are suggesting about the American dream. All right? Symbols are the final thematic concept that we're covering this year. They're a concept you should be familiar with. If I want to tie symbols into the framework that we've set up with all of the other thematic concepts we've covered this year. All right. So what is a symbol? Yeah, as a review. Well, a symbol is some type of object or concrete thing in a story that represents something with regards to the story's theme. Okay, it's an object that is imbued with thematic relevance, so that that symbol can then be used in different ways to suggest different things about the story's message. Okay, and because this message not only comes through poetic justice, that's the primary means by which we understand a story's message. But it isn't the only way, because in addition to seeing the story's message through the poetic justice done to the characters, we can also see a message through what happens to the symbols of the story. Okay? What I want to do today is I want to talk about 3 key symbols that we can see in The Great Gatsby, and then introduce a 4th that you'll be noticing in this next chapter, and talk about how each of those symbols helps us better understand what Fitzgerald is saying about the American dream and The Great Gatsby. Okay? So the first symbols that I want us to look at are East and West Egg. All right? East and West Egg are the 2 different peninsulas that the book is centered on, right? Tom, lives in East Egg. Gatsby and Nick live in West Egg, all right? And both peninsulas are shaped like eggs, thus they're called East and West Egg, okay? If you've been reading carefully, however, you've noticed that while these 2 lands are geographically very similar, so similar that, if Fitzgerald says that birds, you could hardly tell the difference, the people who live on these 2 islands is rather different, right? In some ways, both islands, both peninsulas look rather similar, right? Both are rich, right? Both are very rich, Gatsby and, Tom are both very rich men. But there's a key difference between East and West Egg. All right, what's the difference? Well, the difference is that East Egg is where people with landed wealth go. These are the people who inherit all their extravagant wealth from other people, right? Tom is really, really wealthy, not because he worked really hard, but because he inherited a fortune. One of the things we're going to see about West Egg is that while people in West Egg tend to be rather wealthy, Nick is a bit of an exception, but he's still, upper middle class by today's standards. West Egg tends to be those who earned their wealth, okay? So there's a difference between those who inherited wealth and those who earned their wealth. East Egg and West Egg, okay? And one of the things we notice in The Great Gatsby is we're going to notice a lot of differences between East and West Egg, between those who earned their money and those who inherited their money. One thing we can see is that the parties of those who earned their money are a lot better. Gatsby's parties are the place to be. Whenever Gatsby throws a party, everyone comes, whether they're invited or not. Compare that to the parties at East Egg, and the parties that, Tom and his friends throw aren't really fun parties, okay? And most of them end in disaster, okay? So there's, this implicit, critique being drawn here of inherited wealth, okay? But one of the things I want us to see is how this raises questions about the American dream, okay? One of the questions it raises is just a question about inherited wealth in the first place. Can you have the American dream when you have people who inherit massive amounts of wealth, right? Because you have people like Tom who are able to live the American dream, yet Tom never had to work for it, right? Tom is able to live and do careless, stupid things that, as we're going to see, hurt other people. Yet he doesn't really have to suffer for it because he has enough money. Because he has enough money, he doesn't need to work hard to achieve success. Okay, and there's a question that's being raised here. Is the American dream really able to be achieved when people can just inherit wealth and use it however they will, right? Is that really pursuing the American dream? There's another critique I also want us to see here related to a larger theme of the East versus the West, okay? Because when we're talking about, America, East and West, those two directions, are inherently symbolic because of our nation's history, okay? We saw this, hopefully when we were reciting Walt Whitman's poem earlier this year at the beginning of each class, right? When we were reciting Pioneers, Oh Pioneers, we were talking about the pioneers who went west, right? Because west in America has certain symbolic connotations to it, right? Going west is the idea of adventure, of discovery, and of also being able to gain new wealth, as we talked about, last week. One of the reasons why America is a land of opportunities because we have land. And there's especially land out west that in the time people said, oh, well, this land isn't being used. We can take it. Now, of course, there were people living in the West. There are many Native American tribes who end up, losing all their land as, Americans came in and decided to boot the Native Americans out. Okay, and that's a whole other discussion that you can have have in history class about the fact that we kicked all the Native Americans out. Whether that was right for us to do to the Native Americans. What and how we should have handled the tensions between the Native American tribes and the ever expanding American states at that time. All right, we're not going to get into that there. I'm simply raised as a relevant point. Okay. But people at the time, for better or for worse, saw the West as unclaimed land that they could claim for themselves, as we talked about, especially in the days when farming, most people are farmers. Land, there's a direct relationship between land and wealth. If you're a good farmer, right, you need land in order to have wealth. Okay, and so a lot of there's a sense in which where do you find the American dream? Well, the American dream is always found on the western frontier, right, because that's where you go if you want to gain land and you want to gain wealth. All right, there's a connection between the American dream and the West. Go west, young man. Go and achieve success and achieve the American dream. All right. There's even a sense in which the West represents the future, and the East represents the past. Because in America, the past was, the East was first settled, and then as the years went by, we moved further and further and further west. And so there's an idea in which the West represents the future, and the East represents the past. Okay, but there are a couple questions that are raised by this. All right. One of the questions that we should see this raising is, as you look at some of the characters in The Great Gatsby, characters like Tom and Nick and even Gatsby himself, all these characters grew up in the West and have come east, as far east as they can go, to New York. And this raises a question. The question raises, if all these characters are trying to pursue the American dream, why are they coming east back to the past? That seems rather odd. That seems to go against the American dream, that these people trying to pursue the American dream are symbolically moving to the past or symbolically fleeing the land of opportunity. Okay? We're going to see why this is relevant as we go on. One of the things we're going to see is that these characters are trying to live in the past in many ways, and this raises a question of, can you live in the past, as these characters symbolically are, by moving back east, and still pursue the American dream? And the story raises, of course, another question as well, which is by this time, the western frontier isn't much of a frontier anymore, right? In the 1920s, a lot of this land has already been settled. So one of the questions that, that Fitzgerald is also raising is, when we no longer have a western frontier, can we still achieve the American dream? Was the American dream only something that was true in the 1800s, right? Once all the land is taken, can everyone still obtain the American dream through enough work? Okay, and that's a question that's being raised, And certainly, as we think about the symbolism of the East and West, it's very relevant that those in East Egg are those with the inherited wealth. They gain their wealth from the past, while those in West Egg are those who are working, pursuing the American dream, and have to work hard. They can't just achieve things in the past. They have to work in order to achieve their futures. Okay. There's one last symbol that I want us to think about, though. As we're one last symbol I want to talk about. I'm going to give you one last one to consider before reading chapter 5. The last symbol I want us to consider with regards to the American dream and The Great Gatsby is Gatsby's books. Okay, In Gatsby's Great Party in Chapter 3, at one point Jordan and Nick go inside and they meet this owl-eyed man who's looking at Gatsby's book and talking about the fact that Gatsby's books are uncut. Now, this language might seem odd to you. What does it mean that the pages of the book are uncut? Okay, and there's a bit of a historical background you understand to understand why this is relevant. Okay, so back in the 1920s, when you bought books, when you buy a book like The Great Gatsby today, you buy the book uncut, right? You get the book off the shelf, you can immediately flip through all the pages and read the whole thing. All right, but back at that time, when you bought the book, the pages were actually folded together, right? So if you opened the book, what you got was a series of folds. And, every other page, the text inside, let me make sure you can see this, would be folded together, right? So this would all, these two pages will all be one long piece of paper that was folded inward, okay? So if you have a piece of paper like this, you'd fold it, and you'd bind all these ends together. And so in the book, when you open it, there'd be this fold. And so what would you need to do if you want to read? Well, you actually need to kind of cut this paper, all right? You need to cut open all the pages so you could read it, okay? That's why sometimes in older books, they have jagged edges. Or when a book is trying to look like it's older, it has jagged edges, okay? So in my copy of the Odyssey here, you'll see that, the edges of these pages are kind of, ragged. Now, it's not because this book was actually originally cut like they used to, okay? This is just, whoever made this book wanted to make it look like it was old, so they made it with jagged edges, okay? But that's why older books had jagged edges, it's because you actually had to cut them open, okay? And so as we're looking at Gatsby's books, when the owl-eyed man says that all these books are uncut, well, what does that mean about Gatsby's reading of those books? And what does that in turn suggest about Gatsby and who Gatsby is if he has a bunch of books in his house but the books are all uncut? I want you to think about that question, okay? One final symbol I want to leave there for your consideration. Color is a very important theme in The Great Gatsby, okay? One of the most important colors is the color green, because of the green light that's at the end of Daisy's dock that Gatsby stares at, and we'll talk about that at a later time, okay? One of the other most essential color themes in The Great Gatsby is the color yellow, okay? And one of the things I want you to do as you are reading through Chapter 5 is I want you to make a list as you listen to it of all the things that are described as being either yellow or golden or some other yellowish color. Okay, I want you to think about why is the color yellow or gold symbolically important, particularly with regards to the American dream. And as we're reading about all these yellow and golden things, why might this be relevant, and what might Fitzgerald be suggesting about the American dream through the yellow and gold objects that we're going to see in the scene, all right? So I want you to think about that as we read Chapter 5. We'll continue to look at the theme of the American dream next week as we conclude the book and look at what Fitzgerald is saying about the American dream. In the meantime, I hope you all have a great rest of your days, and I'll see you again for class next week.